Before I start this devlog, I want to mention that it will have even less editing than usual, because I decided I had enough of Kdenlive randomly crashing during rendering for no discernible reason, so I switched to Shotcut, meaning that once again I have to learn a video editing program from scratch. That being said, enjoy the devlog. This week I started by implementing the check to see if player should go to chapter 2x or 3, and I wasn't lying in the last devlog when I said that this was an overcomplicated method. And I'm not calling this a spoiler, because even if you can read what's happening here, there's no way you could tell what it actually means in terms of gameplay at a glance. And if you put effort into understanding it, then you really can't put the blame for getting spoiled on me. I also worked out the initial enemy positioning, though it almost certainly won't be the final one. I didn't put much thought into it, I just wanted something that's usable that I could then test, and based on that make iterative improvements. The only noteworthy parts are that the bosses spawned above the lower left lake and to the right of the central lake will be trying to make it to the escape point at the northern end of the map. The chapter ends if they are both dead, either from this chapter or the previous one, or they successfully escaped. There is a small group of units just above the player's starting position to give you something to do immediately, a ballista that threatens a good chunk of the map, and just some enemies scattered throughout the upper half of the level, with more arriving as reinforcements from the northern road and the bodies of water. I also got started on some of the events that can occur during this chapter, but the progress I made is not what I want to focus on this week, because I've also done some thinking and I realized that I might want to change my approach to developing this ROM hack. Up until now I've been making it one chapter at a time, working on one until I was satisfied with its level of polish. And that was absolutely the correct approach to begin with. Thanks to it I have a prologue and 2 chapters to show what I'm aiming for. But ultimately having this big branching story with a ton of details is secondary to having a story at all. So I intend to at least try to create the skeleton of the entire game, implementing the map, the enemy placement, and the start and end events of every chapter. And once that is done, and I have the core of the story in place, I can go through all of it again and add the details and all the polish I want. I can see several benefits to this approach. For one, I'll be able to actually release the first version of the ROM hack much sooner. Granted, not as soon as I'm done with the initial not rush, because that implies being in a hurry, but the initial pass-through. At the point that I'm done with that, the ROM hack will still need a lot of playtesting, polishing, and the addition of some of the places where the storyline branches off, but it won't require the level of polish that I have applied to the prologue and chapter 1. That kind of polish can come in a later update to the ROM hack, which I could see that being a suboptimal approach for some ROM hacks, but since I am placing a lot of focus on replayability, I think this would work well enough, since each update will give you an excuse to give the game another go, taking different paths through. This approach would also give me more freedom in choosing what to work on. Currently, if I get a really good idea for something that would happen halfway through chapter 4, all I can do is write it down in my notes, so that it waits for when I actually have a chapter 4 that I could set it up in. Which by the time I'll get there, I of course will no longer have that initial burst of inspiration. And similarly, when creating an event in the story that would have consequences down the line, currently I just have to make a note to myself in each of the future chapters to consider the consequences, instead of being able to immediately go through the story and implement the changes that the event would cause. It's not all beneficial though. Doing it this way does mean starting by making the remaining maps and determining unit placements on them, which, as you may have noticed, I'm not the biggest fan of. But at least once I get past that, I won't have to work on them again, save for some minor changes inspired from playtesting. And who knows, maybe I'll even find a way to enjoy the process. Either way, that's what I've got for you this week. I hope you enjoyed this update and I hope to see you in the next devlog. Until then, farewell.